It's not what you accept, it's what you tolerate. In the days after the Bondi shooting, there's been a lot of blame and finger pointing. But who is really to blame? Is it the failure of the Albanese government? Is it a failure of state and federal policing? Could anything have been done to prevent this from happening, realistically? Or was it just a one-off event that was going to happen no matter how good a country's laws or security are? Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank and I'm your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. This episode is going to be a somber and heavy one. I'm going to be covering the Bondi Massacre, or the Bondi shooting, that took place a week ago at time of recording. I'm going to go pretty in depth with the event itself and how the narrative shifted and changed in the days following the massacre. In the days following the massacre, a lot of finger pointing and blame has been going around the media, political world, social media influencers, talking heads, and podcasters alike. A lot of blame and accusations have landed at the Albanese government's doorstep. But is Anthony Albanese and the Labor government really to blame? Or is it just misplaced outrage by angry and upset people? And rightfully so. This is a horrific event that doesn't happen in Australia, or at least didn't happen in Australia until last Sunday. I'll be attempting to fact check and set the record straight on a few of the accusations made this week, as well as doing a real deep dive into the aftermath of the massacre, such as the proposed gun and hate speech laws that are most likely going to be brought in as a result of this tragedy, as well as looking at the rise of anti-Semitic attacks globally. I've got a 56-page script to get through, so let's waste no more time. This is episode 91 of The Truth Tank, the Bondi Massacre. Just before I get too far into the episode, you'll have to forgive my voice. I've had this really nasty cough the last couple of weeks, so my voice might be a little croaky still, so I do apologise for that. The 14th of December 2025 at approximately 6:47 Australian Eastern Daylight Time at Archer Park, Bondi Beach, located in Sydney, New South Wales, right across from the Bondi Pavilion and Campbell Parade. The Chonaka by the Sea, or Chonaka by the Sea, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, which is a Hanukkah celebration hosted by Chabad Bondi, was celebrating the first day of Hanukkah. Around 1,000 people, most of which were families and Jewish community members, were in attendance. 2 gunmen opened fire into the Hanukkah celebrations, killing 15 people in attendance. There were 16 total fatalities if you include the piece of shit that carried out the attack, one of which was a 10-year-old girl. Around 40 people were injured, including police and civilians. It's very clear that this was a targeted attack of the Jewish community. When I first heard about it, it wasn't until pretty late on Sunday night. I think it was around 8:30, 8 o'clock maybe, that I started to hear reports pop up on my phone. I just figured it's just another drive-by that occurred in Sydney, which pretty much happens every night. My partner sent me a message not too long afterwards saying, "Have you heard about the shooting? It's pretty bad." And then I started to pay attention and look into it, and then realised just how bad it actually was. And in the immediate aftermath, it was kind of hard to get a picture of what had happened. There was so much information coming in. There was multiple different mobile phone shot footage of the shooters and people running from the gunfire and people running towards it. It was very confusing to get a clear picture of what had happened. The press conferences went until about 10:30 that night. I stayed up and I watched the press conference with Anthony Albanese and the New South Wales Premier and Police Minister. And it wasn't until then that the magnitude of what had happened started to sink in. I thought, fuck, this is like a full-blown terrorist attack that's happened on Australian soil. And so far, Australia has pretty much got away without any terrorist attacks, really. We've had a couple of small ones, a couple of nuts that have stabbed up the Westfield shopping centre, and some shootings involving the police and sovereign citizens, but nothing like this. This type of thing you see happen in Europe or the United States. It's definitely not something that I thought I'd ever see happen on the shores of Bondi Beach. And if you know anything about Bondi, it's a massive tourist attraction. It's probably the most famous beach in Australia and was obviously targeted for that reason. Thousands of people go to Bondi every day. Most people have probably heard of Bondi. It's a popular place with tourists and locals. It's always packed, even in winter there's people around. So it was really shocking that an event like this could happen, 1, at a beach, and 2, in a location that is so popular. While I was watching the press conferences, I got this real sinking feeling that this event is going to lead to a lot of changes, mostly relating to guns and hate speech. I think I said to my partner, I don't like where this is going, because whenever events like this happen, laws change pretty quickly and they usually don't change back. But we'll get to that later on. Let's just cover what we know happened and the reaction in the immediate hours afterwards. So as I mentioned before, 15 people were killed, 16 if you include the piece of shit that did it. About 40 people were injured. Hospitals were overwhelmed in the immediate hours. Police later discovered a suspected improvised explosive device in a vehicle near the scene, which was believed to be owned by the gunman. They also found a ISIS flag in the windshield of that vehicle, which is a pretty clear indication as who might be behind it. One of the first quotes from Anthony Albanese, which has been fact-checked. This is a quote from him. "This was a deliberate attack on Jewish people during the first day of Hanukkah," Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. And I don't think that can really be debated. It was a very obvious anti-Semitic attack targeted towards the Jewish community. So let's have a look at the background to the event and some of the context. So if you don't know, Bondi Beach is one of Sydney's most iconic public spaces. It symbolises safety, leisure, surf, sun, It's a popular place for community gatherings. Who doesn't like going to the beach? And probably most importantly of all, it is a very strong icon of the Australian way of life. And what happened on Sunday was a direct attack on the Australian way of life. It wasn't just a targeted attack towards the Jewish community, it was an attack on every Australian and every Australian that holds our Australian ideals and way of life sacred. I'm one of those people. Australia is the best country in the world to live. It's laid back. Yeah, fair enough, it's pretty fucking hot in summer, but besides that, it's a pretty good place to live. And places like Bondi symbolise and embody those Australian values. It's laid back, it's relaxing, it's got the beach, it's got the water, two massive fundamentals of Australian geography. Everyone comes together to go to the beach no matter what walk of life you're from, especially in summer. Bondi is usually packed with people trying to get out of the heat, which is ironic because they sit around on the beach getting fried before going into the water. So what happened on Sunday was a direct attack on not only the Jewish community, but on the Australian way of life. So Chabad Bondi hosts the annual Hanukkah events, which draw hundreds of families, most of which are from Sydney's eastern suburbs and the surrounding Jewish communities. Attendees included children, families, the elderly, adults of all varying ages, as well as Jewish community leaders. I don't know for sure, but I'd say there's probably non-Jewish people there as well, which reflects the multi-generational presence. And as far as I know, Jews have been in Australia for a very long time. I think going back right to the first settlers. I know Melbourne has a pretty large Jewish population. The guy that set up the Australian Ice Hockey League in Victoria was a Jewish migrant. I think he came here after World War II. Sydney has a big Jewish population. Where I am, not so much. I do remember going to a temple when I was in primary school as a cross-religious excursion. I went to a Catholic school and we went to a Jewish temple and somewhere else to see how other religions did things. The rabbi talked us through Jewish beliefs in the Torah. I have studied the lands of the Bible and ancient Israel at uni, which is a fascinating course to do because it's part of an archaeology course, so you got to connect it back to what is known factually about these areas. How do these stories tie into what we know actually happened at these specific times? Were there any preceding security and or threat awareness before the shootings? Australian intelligence agencies had investigated extremist sympathisers in the community, but there were no credible indications of an imminent threat specific to the Bondi event. In other words, nothing popped up on the radar, and that has been a massive point of contention through a lot of talking heads and social media personalities and even the media. A lot of people are saying more should have been done to stop this, but at the same time, if nothing is on the radar, how do you stop somebody? You can't just arrest everybody and hope that you get the right suspect. It's not how democratic societies work. And then you're kind of getting into that Minority Report territory where you are arresting and convicting people based on something they haven't done or something that they might have done. And that's a very murky grey zone in legal territory. And that was one of the massive problems with Soviet Russia. What did Joseph Stalin's head interrogator say? Show me the man, show me the crime. He could get anybody to admit to a crime regardless of whether they did it or not. They didn't care if the person was guilty or not. They just wanted the arrest so they could say, "This, look what we've done. We've got another criminal off the street." Those societies do not fucking work. And it's those talking points that have been reiterated by lots of podcasters and media personalities. And most surprisingly, the opposition Liberal Party have said that, have been spewing that in the last couple of days. More should have been done to prevent this thing from happening. How can you prevent something you don't know is going to happen? And that doesn't come down to the government, in my opinion. That comes down to the intelligence services, to the AFP and to ASIO, which we'll get into a bit later. So reports indicate that prior anti-Semitic incidents in Australia had been rising in the years leading up to 2025, creating an environment of concern, but no direct prediction and no credible threats that something like this was going to happen. And yeah, since October 7th, there has been a rise in anti-Semitic incidents globally, not just in Australia. There has been graffiti on mosques. I think a mosque was set on fire in Melbourne earlier in the year. One was graffitied, as well as other Jewish community members' homes and cars have also been vandalised. And another thing that's really annoying, especially from the media, is they don't do enough to address who is behind these attacks. Whenever anything like this happens, there's always this blanket statement that Australians need to do more. Australians, you are bad, you need to do better. It always boils down to this black and white fucking argument, especially from political leaders in the media. They always enforce this black and white narrative that it's Australians as a whole that are responsible and or need to do more to prevent these things from happening. What the fuck are we supposed to do as an Australian citizen? Do we start patrolling the streets? Because that's probably illegal too. And like I said, I don't personally know anybody in the Jewish community here. How the fuck am I supposed to help or prevent this stuff from happening? There are elements in communities all over the country that most likely do harbour anti-Semitic sentiments, but they are from specific minorities in the community and the nation as a whole. And if you really want to look below the surface, they're probably not that hard to find. I've heard reports that there's people in the Iranian government that are paying criminals to harass and target Jewish communities all over the world. And it's probably not that hard to find out where these attacks are coming from if more background research is done on these people. Because there are certain preachers in the Islamic community in certain parts of Sydney that have been calling for jihad and the targeting of the Jewish community. It's not all Australians. It's not Australians as a whole. It's these minority factions within the community. And I'll go out on a limb and say, maybe this isn't an Australia-wide issue. Maybe this is a fucking Sydney issue. Because Sydney's had an issue with these minority groups for quite a long time. 20 years ago, there was the Cronulla riots, which was ethnically and racially based. I'm not going to go into that now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. It happened in about 2004. It was a boil-over from years of pent-up anger from the Australian community who were being targeted by Lebanese youths who are coming down on the train to Cronulla to harass Australian women, families and lifesavers. And this came to a head when some lifesavers were attacked by a gang of Lebanese youths, and that kickstarted this massive race riot. It wasn't Australia's finest hour, but if you look below the surface, it wasn't that hard to see what was probably going to happen because the locals didn't think enough was being done to protect themselves. There was also these broader issues of young women being gang raped by certain young male minority groups in train stations. One woman was raped 20 times by a gang of young men. There's a documentary on the Cronulla riots a few weeks ago. They try to turn it into this black and white Australians set out to commit hate crimes more or less on ethnic minorities in the community. They touched upon the reasons why, but then they try to turn it into this black and white issue that it was just Australians versus the Lebanese community. It's a far more complex issue, as every fucking issue in the world is. Nothing is black and white. Everything exists in shades of grey. I've never been one to believe in a black and white mentality. Truth lives in the grey zone. The Cronulla riots came after about 4 to 5 years of building anger and resentment. The start of this documentary mentioned the women who had been raped, but then it kind of just dropped that, and that was the real reason, probably one of the main reasons that the Cronulla riots happened. Don't mention the real reasons that led to the riots, such as the young women being raped, families and lifesavers being targeted by criminal gangs, because that's what they are. Turn it into basically this race issue of, what do they keep saying in the documentary? They kept saying blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white Anglo-Saxon Australians were deliberately targeting anyone that looked like this ethnic minority group, which I don't think was really the cause of it or even fucking true. And in the footage they showed, there wasn't that many blonde Australians, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Australians, and to me that is a very dangerous racial stereotype to promote. They're trying to connect this Cronulla riot to this overarching blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan racial issue, which obviously connects back to Hitler and the Nazi Party. This Aryan, quote-unquote Aryan agenda of the master race having blonde hair and blue eyes. The media personalities that kept saying this over and over and over again in this documentary never get called into account for it. They kept saying this, and they really, I think, missed, in my opinion anyway, I think they missed the point of why the fucking riots happened in the first place. It wasn't this overarching Aryan narrative. It was people were getting attacked, nothing was seeming to be done about it, people had enough, and the anger boiled over into this massive event. And I'm seeing a resurgence in some of these themes in the last couple of weeks, especially with the media and politicians that are supposed to be leading this country. And that is really fucking concerning. I think that was my point. I kind of got lost in a bit of a rant there, but I think I made some of the point I was trying to make. So as I was saying, reports indicate that prior anti-Semitic incidents in Australia had been rising since in the years leading up to 2025, which has created this environment of concern, but no direct prediction or any credible threat that something like this might have happened. So let's have a look at the chronological timeline of the Bondi Beach mass shooting. So Sunday 14th of December 2025, Archer Park, Campbell Parade, Bondi Beach. It's about 6:40 p.m, just before the shooting starts. Chanukah by the Sea, a Hanukkah celebration, was underway at Archer Park with about 1,000 attendees. There was music, food stalls, a crowd mingling near the Campbell Parade and the Bondi Pavilion. Around 7 minutes later, at 6:47 p.m, the attack begins. Emergency services receive the first calls reporting shots fired near the Campbell Parade. Most of the shooting was coming from the car park, which is, if you look at a map, it's basically directly across from Bondi Beach and the Campbell Parade. Witnesses describe loud gunfire and panic starts to set in. People start running for cover or drop to the ground. The weaponry used, which was later confirmed by police officials, was one Beretta BRX-1 straight pull rifle and two 12-gauge Stoeger M3000 M3K shotguns. And when I first heard the type of weapons that were used, I started to think they were shooting people with shotguns from the bridge. Everyone's seen that footage of one of the shooters making his way to the park through the car park, but the other guy was on the bridge pretty much the whole time. He was shooting people with a rifle as well as a shotgun, but I didn't think a shotgun would go that far. But when I looked at the location of the car park and the parks, they're not actually that far. But even so, I wouldn't think a standard shotgun round would go that far. I did hear a ex-military guy in the days following the shooting say that high velocity shells were found at the scene of the crime, which probably explains why so many people were hit from that distance. Now, talking about the guns used, this has been a very controversial and hot button issue surrounding firearms, licenses and ownerships. Because the weapons were later traced to a licensed ownership. The father had 6 guns in his possession. He was a member of a shooting club, which allowed him to have multiple firearms. Now, I'm not sure if these laws are the same nationwide. I'm pretty sure they differ from state to state, just like they do in the US. Australia already had pretty strong firearm laws before this happened. And that goes back to the Port Arthur Massacre, where John Howard banned automatic and semi-automatic weapons, which I think was the right call at the time and is a massive factor in why Australia has, up until now, been a very, very safe country, especially surrounding gun crimes, because more people die of knife crimes in Australia than they do firearms, especially in Victoria, which has turned into an open-air prison, and their knife amnesty laws have backfired epically. Around 6:48 to 6:55 p.m, the scene is pretty chaotic, and first responders start administering first aid. Crowds scattered, some sprinted towards side streets, others took cover behind stalls, cars, bushes, or whatever else they could find. Bystanders begin self-organised first aid. Civilians start applying pressure to wounds and help to carry and drag injured people to more secure areas. Phones are used to call loved ones and emergency services. A bystander tackled one gunman and wrestled the weapon away, saving a lot of people's lives in the process, then placed it on the ground. And I think everyone around the world has seen that footage of what can only be described as one of the most heroic acts I've seen in a very long time. And we'll come to this bystander a little later. So by 6:55 p.m, police and emergency response intensifies. New South Wales Police Rapid Response and Armoured Offenders Squad arrive on the scene. Ambulance services and medics start triaging victims at the edge of the park. Police form up and begin to move towards the shooter's position on the footbridge overlooking the crowd. And when you think that this attack begins at 6:47 p.m, that is a pretty impressive response time, and I've heard a lot of criticism that the police didn't react quick enough, which I think is absolute bullshit. The police have to have some time to assess the situation and organise themselves, and then come up with some type of plan of how to neutralise and secure the situation. So this is 6:55, police and emergency response intensifies. By 6:58 p.m, the police have engaged with the shooters. The officers have located and are actively engaging the shooters, which leads to one suspect being fatally shot at the scene, which was the father. So that was in just over a 10-minute period. The police have organised themselves and engaged the shooter, leading to the death of one of the attackers. That's a pretty impressive response time, and I don't think the police have deserved the criticism they have got. And also to have the armoured response squads arrive so quickly too is, I think, testament to how well organised the police were. So at the same time, the other gunman is wounded and taken into custody, where he is under constant guard, which I think is a pretty good idea, because I think there's probably more than a few people that would want to do that guy harm. If you've seen the video afterwards, when he was shot and taken down, people started running up to the footbridge and started stomping on the cunt's head. 2 police officers were injured during the engagement, which later required medical treatment. I think one was hit in the eye and has lost his eyesight as a result. The officers injured were described as seriously wounded but in a stable condition. By 7 p.m, the scene is secured and a broad area response. Police declare the active quote-unquote terrorist incident contained and begin establishing a large exclusion zone around Bondi Beach. Fire and Rescue New South Wales assists with crowd control and safety sweeps. The bomb squad confirmed and secured the 2 improvised explosive devices found in the vehicle. They did not detonate them, and they were removed safely from the scene. So this is a situation that played out in under half an hour. It's mind-boggling on one hand to think of just how much carnage and death and destruction occurred in under half an hour. But on the other hand, it shows how professional and alert the police and first responders were. They shut that situation down in under half an hour because it could have been a hell of a lot worse than it was. These guys were not going to stop until they were put down. And I think the police did a commendable job. I really think the police did the best job they could have done. And I think this was by far the best case scenario. If this had happened again, I think the outcome would have been the same. The police did everything in their power and control to stop these two pieces of shit. They acted in a very fast timeline. I thought this played out over 45 minutes. So I don't think the police could have done any more, and I don't think they should be criticised for not doing enough. And apparently the police officer that shot the gunman on the bridge took a 40.2 meter shot with a pistol with no sights on it whatsoever. Because I thought he got shot by a rifle. I've seen the vision of the shooter being shot and hitting the ground. It sounded like a rifle, but apparently it was just a standard police issue Glock. The police officer who took the shot deserves a medal. He or she must have extraordinary accuracy to take a 40.2 meter shot. The gunman was only hit once and he was taken down, like it hit him like in the shoulder or the upper chest or somewhere like that. He gets hit and goes down like a fucking bag of shit. Police and first responders weren't the only ones to put themselves in harm's way. There's a lot of stories of civilian heroism in response, and the general public and just everyday bystanders that ran towards the danger to help people who were injured. The most famous of them is Ahmed Al-Ahmed. He was the bystander that tackled and disarmed one of the gunmen, who saved lives in the process. He was also wounded for his efforts and was hospitalised as a result. I heard a lot of reports about people shielding children and the elderly from gunfire. One Jewish man laid on top of his son. He was covered in blood. People used clothing and belts to make makeshift tourniquets, and help to lead injured people away from the area. And this is before the formal first responders and the ambulance could even reach them. And one of the undersung heroes were the surf lifesavers, who left their posts with their trauma kits to head up to the park to help and carry off bystanders. I heard stories of police carrying injured people to cars and driving them to the hospital. People were using surfboards to carry the injured as makeshift stretchers. And while no one really wants to experience or see these events play out, these type of events always bring out the very best in people. And it's hearing stories like this that still give me hope for the human race. Because you look at how many people put their own lives in harm's way. They had no idea where the shooting was coming from, how many shooters they were. They chose to fucking act in the face of danger and save lives. It's those selfless acts and that heroic side of the human spirit that brings out the best in people in these situations. And it was amazing to see those lifesavers running up the beach to the park with no shoes on, with their trauma kits, willing to fucking help. And the stories of people lying on top of the injured, on top of the kids and the elderly to protect them with their own bodies. It's those type of stories that bring out the best in humanity. Police carrying the injured to vehicles to drive them to the hospital before the ambulances could get there, or in some cases the ambulances couldn't get to the injured people, so they needed to be carried to a more secure location to put them in an ambulance or a car to take them to the hospital. Because if you see the map, the shooting was being directed into the park, which was from the car park, so that was a whole no-go zone. So people were running towards that area to get injured people into vehicles and get them to the hospital or to safety. So let's have a quick look at the hero bystander Ahmed Al-Ahmed. So Mr. Ahmed is a 43-year-old man. He is a Syrian Australian. He's a fruit and tobacco shop owner from Sydney's Sutherland Shire. His parents are recent arrivals from Syria. And he is the father of 2 daughters. So what happened on the 14th of December 2025 during the mass shooting at the Hanukkah celebration near Bondi Beach? We've all seen the now infamous video footage showing Mr. Ahmed running and tackling one of the gunmen and wrestling a firearm away from him. He takes a weapon off of the shooter, disarms him, knocks him to the ground. In my opinion, I think he probably should have shot him at least in the leg to stop the prick from crawling back to the bridge, or just take him out of the equation altogether. But at the same time, he didn't want to take the law into his own hands, which is commendable in its own right. Mr. Ahmed's actions and him placing himself in harm's way, it was a very real risk. He could have been killed. He was injured. He was shot in the arm and the shoulder. But Mr. Ahmed putting himself in harm's way and tackling the shooter, he put himself at great personal risk. He was shot as a result of his actions. He was shot in the arm and the shoulder and is recovering in hospital. His actions most likely saved a lot of lives from being lost, because that piece of shit gunman was not going to stop. He was going to kill anyone that popped out in front of him. And Mr. Ahmed definitely saved lives by doing what he did. He also just received a check for $2.5 million while in hospital. A GoFundMe was raised for him. People from all over the world donated money, including the Kid Leroy and a American billionaire. And once again, it's situations like this that do bring out the best in people. People will, donate money. I know to a billionaire it's probably small change, and to the Kid Leroy, but normal everyday people donate what they can. We saw this play out with the bushfires and any other global disaster. People are very willing to give their hard-earned money to GoFundMe in order to support people like this. So Mr. Ahmed was injured for his troubles. He was shot twice by the second gunman. He was shot in the shoulder and the hand during or after the confrontation. He was officially recognised for his heroic actions by the New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns, who described his actions as genuine heroism. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese also publicly praised Mr. Ahmed, calling him a true Australian hero. He's also a very humble person too. He seemed very humbled by receiving the check and the praise he's got. He said anyone else would have done it, or something to that effect, which makes this guy even more likable. He's also, I think, now become the poster boy for the positive sides of immigration, because that's been a very contentious issue in the days after the shootings. There's lots of people calling for immigration reforms, and yeah, maybe that's warranted. But on the flip side of that, you hear stories from people who have come from areas such as Syria, who don't exactly have the best global reputation for obvious reasons. When you hear stories of this guy's parents had just migrated from Syria, and this guy puts himself in harm's way to save Australians, and has said that he loves this country, Australia is the best place in the world to live. That shows you the best of what multicultural societies can be. And yeah, that's a contentious and double-sided topic, because there's the negative side of that as well. Because one of the shooters was also an immigrant from Pakistan. So you have these two dualities within this event. You have two immigrants to Australia. One chooses to defile the Australian way of life and attack Australians at what should have been a peaceful family event. On the flip side of that, a recent immigrant to Australia puts his own personal safety in jeopardy by trying to stop one of the gunmen from killing more Australians. I think that perfectly sums up what happened at the Bondi shooting and the more contentious and controversial issue of mass immigration. So let's look at the police response in a little more detail. As we've previously looked at, I don't think the police could have done any more. Police response was pretty rapid. They mobilised pretty quickly. New South Wales Police were on site within minutes of the first emergency calls and arrived at 6:48 p.m. So that's within a minute of the shooting starting. Yet there is a police presence at Bondi because, like I said, it's a massive tourist attraction. Lots of families go there, so there is a police station nearby. Response units immediately sought to locate the gunman's vantage points, which one of them only elevated places was the footbridge in the car park. Why did engagement take minutes? The attackers were using long rifles and shotguns, and due to the elevated position of the shooters, this required careful tactical approaches by police to avoid further casualties. Officers engaged under pretty heavy fire, which required slow and methodical coordination in order to stop two shooters. Police prioritised containment of the shooters and the medical rescue of victims. There's also the other issue of securing the potential explosive devices in the vehicle. All this is playing out in real time while trying to keep other members of the public safe. So in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, the area was secured and scene stabilisation was top priority. By about 7:15 p.m, the area was declared secure and mass casualty protocols were underway. Ambulances continued to transport injured civilians to multiple hospitals around New South Wales. Police begin forensic examination and victim identification, as well as identification of the shooters. And I was surprised by how quickly police identified the shooters, which made me think that they were either known to police or some information from high up came down because they were on some type of a watch list or known to one of the federal agencies. Because if you look back to the Charlie Kirk assassination in September, it took, roughly 24 hours to come up with a suspect, and more information wasn't really known about him until probably 48 hours after the shooting. In comparison with the Bondi shooting, this is under an hour after the event. Police are already IDing victims and IDing the shooters. They found out where they lived, where they were from, that they had just rented an Airbnb, and that the guns were legally obtained firearms, which leads me to believe that they were either known to police or information came from one of the federal authorities, the AFP or ASIO, and that these two were known to the federal authorities, which is why the information was shared so quickly. And I think because terrorism has something to do with it, there's more importance focused on trying to figure out who these people are to prevent any future attacks from happening or any ongoing attacks, because I thought there would have been more than two people involved, and maybe that's the case. I guess we'll find out in the future. Let's have a look at what is known about the two shooters. Who are they? Where do they come from? And why did they carry out this attack? So what do we know about the shooters? The attack was carried out by two male attackers, a father and son. The attack has officially been classified as an anti-Semitic terrorist act inspired by Islamic State ideology. I'll refer to them by name only when contextually necessary. I don't like saying the names of people who commit these types of acts. I don't think they should be remembered. So the older suspect, the father, is aged approximately 50 years old. He's originally from Tola Choki in Hyderabad, India. He migrated to Australia in 1998 on a student visa. He later held a partner visa and then a resident return visa in Australia. He retained his Indian citizenship and held an Indian passport. The younger suspect aged about 24 years old. He was born in Australia, so unfortunately he is an Australian citizen. He's been referred to by his work colleagues as the quiet bricklayer. He was a follower of a controversial cleric. So this guy seems like a pretty boring 24-year-old. He seems to be pretty quiet. Both men travelled from Sydney to the Philippines on the 1st of November 2025, returning on the 28th. They flew into Manila and then travelled south to Davao City, Mindanao, a region with a history of Islamic insurgency and terrorist training camps. Authorities have confirmed the trip and are investigating whether it involved contact with militants or extremist influences or even some type of terrorist training. No definitive link to specific groups has been publicly confirmed yet, but that might change in the future. Investigations are ongoing, however, and Australian authorities are coordinating with the Philippine Bureau of Immigration and security partners to establish whether training or extremist contact did actually occur there. And I think it's pretty safe to say that it did. Why the fuck do they just travel to this area that just so happens to have a link with terrorism? Seems a bit sus to me. They come back on the 28th, and then, less than a month later, they're shooting up a Jewish festival at Bondi Beach. I don't think that's a coincidence. And another hot button issue in the days following the shooting was the background to these two men, mainly relating to how did a non-Australian citizen get a gun license? How did he get so many guns? The father wasn't a Australian citizen, the son was. I think one of the most frustrating parts about these two is the father. You can say, yeah, look, he kind of slipped under the radar. Yeah, he's not an Australian citizen, but he's been here since the 90s, since the late 90s. He's obviously got a job. He's a member of a shooting club. No red flags were raised there, or no red flags appear to be raised during any of the background checks on the firearms. So you can say maybe it's just a lack of judgment. Maybe there wasn't enough funding to look into this guy or whatever. Maybe the people doing the firearms checks didn't do their fucking job properly. You could argue that this guy kind of comes out of nowhere. He gets radicalized at some point. The son, on the other hand, Naveed Akram, I will try not to say that fucking name too many more times, does appear on ASIO's watch list. And that is the most frustrating and concerning part of all this. If he was on the ASIO watch list, as so many political commentators have stated over the past several days, why the fuck wasn't more done about him? This is one of the facts I really wanted to double check. Were ASIO looking into him? Was he on an ASIO watch list? And how did he slip through the cracks? Prior intelligence and security contact. Investigation by ASIO 2019. The youngest suspect was examined by the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation ASIO in 2019. The review lasted approximately 6 months and focused on his associations with individuals subsequently jailed for extremist activities. Well, if that isn't the first red flag, I don't know what the fuck is. So what was the outcome of this investigation? ASIO found no evidence of radicalization or an imminent threat, and he was not placed on an ongoing watch list or subjected to long-term monitoring at the time. That's concerning, considering how things turn out. And obviously, like I said before, how do you stop someone from doing something that hasn't done something yet? How are you supposed to prevent someone from carrying out a massacre until they actually do? And how do you stop these people from getting to this point where they're carrying out a terrorist act if not enough red flags are raised several years ago when something could have been done to stop this guy? How do you stop someone who isn't raising enough red flags? How do you prevent them from getting from the ASIO watch list to doing what they did on Sunday? How do you stop them in between 2019's investigation to 2025's massacre. That is the real legal grey zone. And a lot of people are saying, oh, ASIO should have done more, they should have done this. I'd make an educated guess and say ASIO is probably looking into a lot of people like this, and maybe they don't have the personnel or the funding to look into everybody, and maybe someone who doesn't raise enough red flags or doesn't meet a certain criteria doesn't get looked into long term because they're deemed not a threat, even if they are radicalized later on down the track. So what does ASIO have to say about this? This is the official statement on the ASIO contact. Authorities have acknowledged that the younger man was known to security services due to the 2019 probe. But at the time, quote, there was no indication of any ongoing threat or threat of him engaging in violence. Well, they got that horrifically fucking wrong, didn't they? Thus, while he was previously investigated, he was not on a current terrorism watch list when the attack occurred. Interesting. Police search and raid the premises of these two. Law enforcement raided properties linked to the suspects, including a residence in Bondi Massacre, where authorities believed one or both of the suspects lived. A home in Campsie, where the suspects were believed to have stayed prior to the attack, was also searched by police. During the searches, officers seized additional weapons and evidence and held several people for questioning. Yeah, apparently there was family members that were questioned. Not a lot of information has come out about that. So I'm guessing the cops are probably keeping it close to their chest. A lot of this information probably won't be publicly known for a long time, if it is at all. Police continuing the investigation into the suspects' communications, their travel details and any possible networks of contact or inspiration, including in the Philippines. I think that will be probably the most interesting breakthroughs in this, is what those communications look like, who were they talking to. So let's have a look at the firearms and the explosives linked to this plot. Investigators have confirmed the elder suspect had a firearms license since at least 2015 and was known to possess multiple registered firearms. At the scene and in the vehicle used, improvised explosive devices were found and made safe. ISIS-linked flags were discovered in the suspect's vehicles. 3 discoveries from part of the evidence authorities are using to categorize the attack as, quote, inspired by Islamic State ideology. That quote comes from ABC Digital Syndication. So what is the ongoing and publicly known status of the 2 shooters? The elder suspect was killed by police at the scene. During Sunday's attack, the younger suspect was wounded. He was taken to hospital under guard and has since regained consciousness, which is a shame. Which I'm kind of surprised. I'm really surprised he doesn't have brain damage, because he was stomped in the head by several men more than once. And this is why the cops were... And this is after the cops had already taken him down. He is expected to face terrorism charges once medically fit. I think that's pretty obvious. Apparently he's got 59 charges against him. Investigators continue to review digital devices, communications, travel footprints, and international contacts as part of the prosecution build-up and motive determination, SBS Australia. These people blaming the Albanese government probably should be blaming ASIO, because he was a person of interest, and then he drops off the radar because he wasn't, quote, considered to be a threat. Obviously he was. Obviously he didn't change his opinions. He was not reformed. And by the sounds of it, he actually gets more radicalized after 2019. There were so many things circulating about this guy. There was people saying that he was on a watch list, that he wasn't on a watch list. He was on a watch list at the current time of the attack. So what is fact and what is fiction in this case? So I did some fact checking, and these are the key verified facts and known intelligence about the shooter. So we know he was investigated by ASIO in 2019 for associations with individuals jailed for extremist offences. I think that should keep you on a watch list for at least a decade, because if you've got people being jailed for extremist offences and you're hanging out with them, some of that extremism is probably rubbed off. What is false is he wasn't on a current watch list at the time of the attack. Yes, he did travel to Manila and Davao in the Philippines. The purpose of that trip is still anyone's guess, which I think it's obviously terrorist related. I don't think that's a coincidence. Post-attack, police raid multiple properties, evidence is seized, as well as weapons. People are questioned. The father had licensed, legally purchased firearms. Intelligence prevention and system limits what was known and what wasn't known. Prior intelligence contact, these are facts only. There's no speculation here. This is what is known and what I could find out. Authorities have confirmed that one of the attackers had prior contact with ASIO in 2019. The investigation lasted about 6 months. It was initiated due to contact with extremist people that are in jail. At the conclusion of the review, no active plot was identified, no imminent threat was assessed. The individual was not placed on an ongoing watch list. ASIO has stated there was no information at the time to indicate the intention to carry out violent acts. And this is where the most controversial and most aggravating part of this individual's background has come from. And this is a point that I don't think a lot of people know about or have taken into consideration, is prior contact does not equal active surveillance. Like I mentioned before, if ASIO doesn't deem him a threat or have the resources, or he's just not high enough on the pecking order to investigate further, that doesn't mean he's going to stay on an active surveillance list. And the term watch list we've heard many times since 9/11. What does being on a watch list actually mean? Well, being on a watch list means being known to intelligence services. It does not mean continuous monitoring or real-time tracking, automatic law enforcement intervention. In Australia, surveillance thresholds require credible intent, capability, immediacy. Absent those elements, agencies are legally restricted from ongoing monitoring. This is not judgment, this is a statutory limitation. So in other words, ASIO is kind of hamstrung at how much they can actually look into an individual. And I'll read that part again. Surveillance thresholds require credible intent, capability, immediacy. If those elements aren't there, agencies cannot legally restrict from ongoing monitoring due to statutory limitations, such as, most crimes have the statute of limitations is 7 years. In some crimes, it doesn't carry over your entire life, given the circumstances of the crime. Now, that's great for a functioning democracy, but if you have someone who is influenced by extremist and terrorist ideologies, maybe more surveillance, or I don't know, monthly or 6 monthly checks on these people might be in order. Travel red flags after the fact. And this is another one that has caused a lot of controversy. People saying, well, they went to the Philippines, they should have been questioned when they got back. And yes, I do agree with that. I think some questions needed to be asked. But in hindsight, 2 guys going to the Philippines is 2 guys going to the Philippines. Maybe they were going to see family. Maybe they were going for a holiday. I don't believe that, but the people at Jetstar, the people checking passports, don't have the resources or the bandwidth to carry out checks on every single person that comes through an airport. Thousands of people enter Sydney Airport every day. It's the busiest airport in the fucking country. It's the gateway for most visitors entering Australia. The younger one was born in Australia. The father's been here for a long time. Probably didn't even ring any type of bells, let alone raise any red flags to the people in immigration or customs. So the attackers travelled to the Philippines in November 2025, returning weeks before the attack. At the time of travel, no travel ban was in place, no court orders existed, no active terrorism designation applied. The destinations later raised concern only after the attack. And yeah, that's like the Minority Report thing. How do you stop someone from going through with a planned attack if they haven't actually gone through with it? You can't charge someone with murder until they have committed murder. Just because that person's been stopped once doesn't mean they're not going to try again. And that's that legal grey zone. The law is a very complex and interesting thing to look into. That's something I've been looking into for the last couple of years. There's a lot of grey zones and a lot of little loopholes and things in the law. Setting about laws and making laws is not an easy job either. Travel becomes suspicious in hindsight and not in real time unless it's linked to intelligence triggers, and those triggers were not in place. Why was there no intervention before Sunday? According to official statements, there was no open terrorism investigation at the time of the attack, no warrant to conduct searches, no legal basis to seize weapons prior to the event, no intelligence indicating a specific date, location, or target. In short, there was no legal mechanism to act pre-emptively. In other words, they couldn't have been stopped because there was no indication that they were going to do this. Unless they happened to be pulled over 5 minutes before the attack by the cops because of a broken brake light, or maybe they were going over the speed limit, or they were acting suspicious, until something like that happened and a cop pulls them over and sees the ISIS flag and 6 guns in the back of the car. That's when you can prevent this from happening, but until they're literally on the road, on the way there, there's probably not a lot that can be done unless they start talking about it online or they're being monitored, their communications are being monitored, but as we know, that's just not the case. What changed immediately after the attack? Within hours, terrorism task force were activated. Properties were raided under emergency powers. International intelligence sharing was triggered. Digital communications were seized and analysed. This contrast matters. The powers used after an attack are far broader than those allowed before one. That's an interesting and a very key point. Official reviews announced, as of now, security agencies are reviewing thresholds for re-engaging past subjects, travel-based risk assessment, firearms licensing, oversight in terrorism context. That one should have already been put in place. And I think so too should have the travel ban risk assessment. I mean, it's all good to look into these people now, but 15 people are dead already. The country's not going to be the same again. It's events like this that give people and these agencies a kick up the arse to pull their heads out and start to look more closely at some of these people they've looked into in the past. And it's, unfortunately, it doesn't happen before events like this occur. Whether it's, the government or these agencies getting complacent, maybe it's overwork, underfunding, lack of personnel, whatever it happens to be, these people get pushed to the back burner. As with every industry you see, something always gets overlooked. And maybe this is the kick up the arse the agencies need. But at the same time, I also don't like where some of these proposed law changes are going. Reviews are underway. No immediate claim of intelligence failure has been made. That language is deliberate and typical at this stage, and this is the sledging we see politically and by political commentators. Someone needs to be blamed in these situations. These events can't just happen. I mean, even if everything was done right, something like this was probably going to happen because, terrorists, like criminals, don't care about the law. The other contentious issue is access to weapons and gun control, and how a non-citizen of this country managed to own so many firearms. So what is confirmed about weapons access? Police have confirmed that the attacks used firearms during the attack. Well, no shit. At this stage, authorities have not publicly released the exact make or model of all the weapons or serial numbers, or if any modifications were used. They also haven't said what type of ammunition was used, because I'm pretty sure those shotguns were not using standard buckshot. Whether all weapons were discharged, what has been confirmed, the weapons were capable of sustained fire, multiple magazines were present, ammunition quantities exceeded what would be typical for casual sporting use. Police have stated this publicly and established, quote, intent, not technical detail. Authorities have deliberately withheld some specifics to avoid copycat risk and to preserve evidence integrity. Okay, fair enough. That's another thing I've thought about is, how did they get so much ammunition? Because I thought ammunition was controlled or restricted in this country. I didn't think you could get anything other than basically standard hunting rounds or just target shooting or whatever. I'm not too sure on how it works or the laws in New South Wales, but I thought that would have raised some red flags if you were buying bulk quantities of ammunition and you didn't run a gun club or a shooting range. I thought that would be pretty suspicious. Because what I did notice is the younger shooter, he had a belt with shotgun shells on it and they were red and blue. The red shells are buckshot, I'm pretty sure, but I don't know what the blue ones are. It'd be interesting to see what type of ammo was used. So this brings up the other controversial issue of gun licensing and how a non-citizen of this country could have a firearms license, because I thought only Australian citizens could keep one. And that's the other issue in this, is this guy had 6 firearms and they were legally purchased. I mean, I know people who have trouble even getting a gun license, and yet this dude who is not an Australian citizen manages to get 6 of them. So police have confirmed at least 1 firearm was legally owned. And that's a little different to what we've been hearing in the media. If at least 1 was legally owned, then that brings up the question of illegal firearms. And so far, all the talk has been directed at legal gun ownership, like banning guns is going to make the problem go away. It's just a knee-jerk reaction to this event. Because if there is one thing Western Sydney holds the national record on, it is drive-by shootings committed with illegal firearms. You could ban all guns in Sydney today, and there'd still be plenty of access to illegal firearms. And that's the massive problem, because the government is looking at restricting gun laws further, which I think is missing the point on the bigger problem. There's already tons of illegal guns in Australia, just like the US. If you got rid of all the legal guns, you could still get illegal ones. And in fact, since John Howard did ban semi-automatic and automatic rifles, and there was a gun amnesty in the late 90s after the Port Arthur massacre, the amount of guns in this country has only increased. There was about 2.5 million, or about 3 million before Port Arthur, and after the amnesty there's about 2 or 2.5 million, and currently there's about 4 million or 3.5 million. And yeah, that's also due to the population basically doubling since the late 90s. But that's still a hell of a lot of guns for a country that apparently has the tightest gun laws in the world. And Australia is a big place. There's lots of rural areas with farms. Farmers need weapons to kill pest animals and injured animals. That's only the humane thing to do. I'm just a bit annoyed that the legal firearms are the ones being targeted. If you really wanted to clean up a street, start with the illegal ones. And this guy was a member of a shooting club, so he already had access to plenty of guns. If they didn't have legal guns, they just would have brought them illegally. There's tons of places you can get them in Western Sydney. There's literally a drive-by shooting every fucking night in Western Sydney. It's got more crime in that suburb than anywhere else in the country. The other point I'll make is, if these two were so radicalized and had gone overseas to train in terrorists' camps or been indoctrinated by extremists and come back here to carry out an attack, don't you think they would have already had a backup plan if they couldn't get legal firearms? It's not like they're going to go to all that trouble to get sucked into this radicalization, go overseas to train, have contacts with extremists in the community, and then go, oh wait, I can't get a legal firearm. Oh well, we better call the attack off. They'll just find a way around it. Criminals do not give a fuck about laws, and that's terrorists are a cut above the standard criminal. They're not going to give a fuck. Ideology is far more powerful than any man-made law. The owner held a valid firearms license at the time of attack, also makes it harder to determine. What remains under investigation, whether all the weapons used were licensed, whether any were borrowed, shared, or accessed indirectly, whether storage requirements were fully complied with, like that matters now. This is also a key point about Australian firearm laws. A valid license does not automatically imply lawful use or lawful access by others. And I know in New South Wales they have this law that because of all the organised crime in Sydney and New South Wales, especially with the bikies and minority groups within the community, they have this law that if you have a firearm or a firearms license, you can't see a friend who has been convicted or is a member of an outlaw or criminal element. In other words, if you have a gun license, they don't want the gun you legally own being used in a crime by your underworld friend. Don't quote me on it, but I heard that on the news briefly. I thought that was an interesting law. So it's not like the laws aren't already in place. Just going back to the storage of firearms. Under New South Wales firearms law, weapons must be stored and unloaded, and they need to be locked in an approved gun safe. Ammunition needs to be stored separately from the gun. Access is restricted to the licensed individual. Police have confirmed they are investigating how the weapons were accessed prior to the attack. Well, I think that one is kind of obvious because obviously if he did have the 6 guns, if he had them in a safe, he obviously knows how to open the safe. He's got the code. It wouldn't be that hard to just fucking take the firearms out and go do this. You have to buy these specific gun safes from this certain manufacturer. You have to have a license. You have to get the license renewed every 2 years. I was thinking about getting a gun license about 12 years ago. I'd gone to the shooting range in the city. I thought it was pretty cool. I thought, this might be cool to take up as a hobby. Obviously, I never went through with it because it was a waste of time and money. I had to sit this exam, then you would have had to pay $250 for the license every 2 years, which has probably gone up with inflation since then. Then you have to buy the gun and the safe and keep it and have pretty much a good reason why you want it. I don't hunt, so it would be an absolute waste of time and money. And after that license has expired, then the cops or whoever checks up could come around and want to see the weapon, and if it's been stored properly. Whether storage conditions were breached, whether another person had unsupervised access to the line of inquiry directly affects potential secondary charges, civil liberty, and future licensing reform. And those last points might be maybe the saving grace in the future gun laws, which will undoubtedly be coming at some point. Now, what about these additional items that the police recovered? So following the attack, police searchers recovered additional ammunition, firearm-related equipment, other items now held as evidence. Authorities have not publicly confirmed explosive materials, weapon modifications, use of prohibited firearms or types of ammo. Any early claims circulated online about explosives or automatic weapons have not been confirmed by the police at this time. Why weapons weren't seized earlier? Police have addressed this directly. At the time before the attack, there was no active firearms prohibition order. No warrant existed to seize weapons, no immediate threats assessment tied the license holder to planned violence. In Australia, firearms cannot be seized preemptively without legal cause, even if an individual has previously been assessed by intelligence agencies. The separation between intelligence and licensing is international under law. Okay, that's interesting. So the gun laws are pretty tight in this country, and I'm very skeptical of these future reforms because I don't think the guns are the problem. People, mainly radicalized extremists, are the problem in this case, not legally owning gun owners. And I heard this Muppet academic on the news today say, why does anyone need more than one gun? What if you're a collector? What if you're a hunter? You can't go duck hunting with a rifle, and you can't go deer hunting with a shotgun. Well, you might be able to, I don't know, but it would be considered cruel. That would be a perfectly legitimate answer as to why someone would need more than one gun. What if you're a pistol shooter or an Olympian? I mean, you just think of the different types of guns just within the shotgun family. You have a pump-action shotgun, a double barrel shotgun for hunting, maybe an over-under, single shot for target shooting. Why do you need more than one gun is a fucking ridiculous question. That's like saying, why do you need one guitar? I love guitars. I've been playing guitar for a long fucking time. I've got 2 at the moment. I used to have about 5 or 6. I had a 7-string. I had a cheap Les Paul. I had my 2 main ones, my Dean Razorback and Schecter Sinister Gates Avenger. I had an acoustic which broke. I had a classical guitar and I have a bass guitar. So I sold the 7-string and a few others. I've still got the 2 I've still got the Schecter, the Dean, and the bass guitar, and I plan on buying more. Why? Because they're cool, they all sound different, they all look different. They're a functioning instrument as well as being a beautiful piece of art. I plan on buying a few more Les Pauls. I want to get one for my next birthday. It's a milestone birthday, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to spend $2,500 and buy a nice Les Paul. Why the fuck not? They sound cool, they got a cool shape, cool sound, cool feel to them. Every guitar is different. So that's a pretty good argument of why I need more than one guitar. It also helps having more than one guitar because they can have different gauge strings on it and different tunings. I like a lot of heavy music. I can't play a Slipknot song in standard tuning. If I detune my Floyd Rose guitars, which my main two both have, I'd have to take it to the music shop and get someone to adjust the tremolo bar and the neck. Otherwise, the strings are going to be sloppy and sound crap, and they're not going to hold the tension. The bridge is going to drop, and it's going to pretty much be unplayable. When I had my guitar fixed a couple of months ago, this is a problem I encountered because I had tried to do it myself, and I used to be able to do it. I completely forgotten how to. I can't remember how much I'd adjusted the tremolo. It turns out I must have had a slightly heavier gauge string because that guitar I primarily used in a D tuning, DAD, GBE. Now the cheap Les Paul I used to use that for all the Slipknot and Machine Head songs I would try to play, and that was like C sharp tuning or whatever it was. It was a step down. It was pretty heavy, and I had to get the Zakk Wylde custom heavy gauge skins, the strings, which was a 52 to I think it was a 13, which is quite fucking chunky. But that's what those strings are designed for. They're designed to hold the tension so you don't get that rattle. I can't go pay that type of money every time I want to play a different song and get the strings changed out. It's just not practical or realistic. What is realistic is having more than one guitar to play the different songs and the different tunings. I rest my case. So what happens now, post-attack? Police powers have been expanded immediately. Emergency search and seizure authorities were enacted. Firearms linked to the suspects were confiscated. Licensing records are under full review. Government officials have confirmed firearms licensing processes will be reviewed. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I think that's probably what should have been happening in the last fucking 20 years or so. It sounds like these departments have got complacent or lazy. Information sharing between intelligence and licensing bodies is under scrutiny. I thought that would have already been in place. That seems like a no-brainer. If you've got a guy who's got red flags on terror watch list, you think you might want to pass some of the red flags along to the people providing firearms licenses, or maybe the gun club, and go, hey, this guy is on our radar. Maybe keep an eye on him. Let us know if he starts buying huge quantities of ammunition. And I've heard a lot of criticism about the police not neutralising threats earlier. Police have stated that they could not assume there was only one shooter. And I think that's probably rightfully so in this day and age. There's usually more than one. They could also not assume no secondary device or ambush. They had to secure civilians first while locating the attackers under active shooter protocols. Officers must prioritise containment and casualty prevention until the threat is confirmed to be isolated. Civilians applied first aid. They used their clothing as tourniquets and belts and guided others to safety. Some police officers transported victims directly to hospital when ambulances were overwhelmed. These actions occurred before the scene was fully secure. Any delays don't come from inactivity. It was uncertainty. Authorities have emphasised that the situation evolved minute by minute. Decisions were made on incomplete and rapidly changing information. Anyone with half a brain can work that out, and I don't think most not civilised, mentally functioning people are really questioning the authorities or their response times. This is more something I've heard online by these political fucking commentators and influencers, and even some people in politics. Politicians they'll come out publicly and say the most insensitive, stupid, and sometimes even radical statements purely for the objective of political point scoring. I don't think the police have been too heavily criticised. Most of the criticism has been directed at ASIO and the AFP and the Albanese government. One thing the Albanese government has been accused of is cutting funding to ASIO for intelligence resourcing. And that's what I want to look at next. And this is I've been hearing this a lot, especially on social media, and this is a fact I really wanted to check, because when I first heard it, it didn't make a lot of sense, and I thought it was a bit of political sledging, because the Liberal Party has said this several times. Anything the Liberal Party says, I naturally disregard anyway. But they have directly accused Labor of cutting the funding to ASIO and the AFP, so I wanted to know if this was true. From what I could find out, there is no credible evidence that ASIO's core budget has been cut over the past 10 years. The official Australian government budget documents show ongoing funding for ASIO as part of the Home Affairs portfolio. ASIO's Security Intelligence Program has a multi-year funding allocation, with appropriations continuing in the 24-25 and 25-26 budgets. That information comes from the Department of Home Affairs website. In the 2022-23 federal budget under the Morrison Liberal government, additional funding was committed to national security and intelligence, including Australia's Federal Police, the AFP, capabilities and the broader security apparatus, described as, quote, record funding to counter terrorism and related threats, building on a decade of investment, including an earlier $1.3 billion pledge for ASIO over 10 years. That's from the Minister of Home Affairs.gov.au. And that's what I thought. I thought these agencies had pretty much unlimited funding, especially after 9/11 and the siege and the Lindt siege in Sydney about 10, 12 years ago. I didn't think the security agencies ever really had the budgets slashed on anything. More recently, the Albanese government has also announced further budget boosts for counter-terrorism and counterintelligence programs, including a $570 million for ASIO and the AFP to enhance threat response and surveillance capabilities. Interesting. ASIO's budget has not been meaningfully reduced. Official statements describe ongoing and increased funding over the past decade. Funding trends reflect expansion, not contraction, in response to evolving threats. ASIO and the AFP surveillance is something I've been hearing constantly over the past couple of days, especially the surveillance of former SAS operator Ben Roberts-Smith, who has had a lot of legal battles in the last couple of years due to alleged war crimes committed in Afghanistan. Now, I'm putting it on the record, I love Ben Roberts-Smith. I think he's a national hero, and what has happened to him is absolutely bullshit and unpatriotic. I don't think it's the business of the Australian people or in their best interest to know what the SAS or any of these military groups get up to. These guys get paid to take evil pieces off of the global chessboard. That's their job, that's their role. Now, he's alleged to have committed war crimes in Afghanistan by allegedly, I think it was killing an unarmed prisoner or taking the brother of a known terrorist who killed Australians on a military base, who then retreated back to his village. Apparently they found the brother and he was kicked off of a cliff or something like that. I think an older man was also killed. Now, I'm not saying any of this is true. This is just from what I can remember. This is all allegedly. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. This is just what I have heard about the Ben Roberts-Smith situation. So the guy that went missing, the brother of the known terrorist, the wife is the one that was suing the Australian government for his death or his disappearance. I can't remember if the body was found or not. No one has ever really said that this guy was related to a terrorist. Now, he obviously knew what the brother was up to and didn't, I don't know, maybe he cooperated, maybe he didn't, I don't know, I wasn't there. But to say this dude was 100% innocent, I think is a bit of a stretch. Like, the SAS are not going to make stupid mistakes like that. They know who they're after, they know who they're tracking, they know who's connected to who. And if you take a terrorist or someone who's funding terrorists, because apparently that's what was happening, this village was supplying the Taliban. If these people are supplying terrorists, then aren't they terrorist sympathizers? Because if you were funding criminal elements like a bikie gang or something, you would still be brought in for questioning by the police. That would still be illegal. Why is there a different legal double standard in this case? And if he was killing legitimate terrorist threats, then do we really fucking care? If he's taking evil people off the chessboard, like, What's the fucking problem? And I thought that was the whole point. So recently this week I've heard a lot of reports about the AFP surveillance of Ben Roberts-Smith after the trial. I think was it earlier this year or last year? People claiming that the Albanese government cut funding from ASIO and the AFP's surveillance programs of Islamic extremists and diverted those resources to looking into neo-Nazis and even a full-time surveillance team for Ben Roberts-Smith. So I wanted to fact-check that and to find out what people are talking about. I wanted to see if there was any truth to these claims. From what I could find out, apparently there is no public evidence that Ben Roberts-Smith, the former Australian soldier and Victoria Cross recipient, is, quote, under full-time AFP surveillance. That doesn't necessarily mean he's not under some form of surveillance. He's just not under full-time AFP surveillance. So what is public record? In 2018, the AFP received referrals regarding allegations of war crimes involving Ben Roberts-Smith and conducted an investigation. A former AFP commissioner informed him of referrals which Ben Roberts-Smith allegedly tried to evade, and that information comes from Wikipedia, so take that with a grain of salt. The matter evolved over years, with defamation cases and court findings confirming the substantial truth of some allegations. That comes from The Guardian. However, there is no credible reporting that the AFP maintains constant active surveillance of him today. That doesn't mean there isn't some form of surveillance or that checkups aren't being done. Just because there's no public source doesn't mean there isn't some type of covert one, and I don't think this information would be made public anyway. So I really don't know what to believe with that one. My gut tells me there is probably some type of surveillance. I doubt the AFP is going to come out publicly and say otherwise, because it was a very high-profile case, and no, I think it's disgusting the way he was treated. He's a fucking war hero. He's a Victoria Cross recipient. He acted bravely under fire, which is more than most people can say for themselves. I think what happened to him is absolutely disgusting, and it's based on this woke witch hunt of the modern era where the complete inversion of heroism and truth happens every single day. People see someone like him being glorified for heroism. They don't like that. They get jealous of that, and they want to bring someone like that down. So they'll look into their past and they'll find some trivial little thing that, at least to my knowledge anyway, there doesn't seem to be huge amounts of information for it. I think it's largely subjective, depending on who you ask, and I think this all came from some sociology fucking reporter who wrote an article. There's this massive broader context here that a lot of these woke fucking journalists don't even want to acknowledge. Now, speaking of how woke politics has pretty much eroded values of the entire Western world, there are a few events that have played into the increase of anti-Semitism in Australia, and that is the pro-Palestinian protests that have taken place in every Australian city for like over 280 days this year. They're well documented. Thousands of people attend them, and I really don't think many of those people understand why they're even there. And yeah, like, I'm all for a free Palestine. I think what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing in Gaza is a war crime. I think it's inhuman. I think Bibi is the personification of evil and Satan. I think he is the most evil man on planet Earth at the moment. I don't even think Putin can compare to how evil Netanyahu is. What's happened in Gaza is a genocide, regardless of who is committing it. But I also don't agree with having pro-Palestine protests every single week where people are allowed to chant anti-Semitic slogans like "to the river, to the sea," global intifada, whatever the fuck that word is. Now, if you're just protesting for Palestinian rights, cool, more power to you. But there's been extremist elements in these crowds, and there always has been, and I don't think the government has done nearly enough to try to stop it. And I think that's where the Albanese government has really dropped the ball, and this is where they're getting the most criticism from, and why they've been accused of not doing enough to stop anti-Semitic attacks. Because extremist elements have infiltrated these pro-Palestinian protests. There's been Hamas headbands and flags, as well as ISIS flags in these crowds, and not one person, to my knowledge, has been arrested for it. This is fucking Australia. This is not the Middle East. If you want to protest for the people of Palestine, go right ahead. Raise money for humanitarian aid. Do whatever you can. But when you're chanting anti-Semitic slogans like "to the river, to the sea," it's time for a global intifada, maybe that's not based on peace. Maybe that's based on division and anti-Semitism. If you have half a brain and you can read between the lines and you're a generally intelligent person, it's not that hard to work out that the Jews aren't responsible for what is happening in Palestine, but a small part of the Israeli government is. And that is the ultra-Zionist movement within the Israeli government. Not every Israeli condones or wants the Gaza war. It's not good for anybody. It's not good for people who live near there. It's not good for Israel as a whole. There's elements in the IDF and the upper echelons of the Israeli Defense Force that don't approve of it. And it ultimately comes down to it's one man's war against an entire fucking people. And I don't think it's anti-Semitic to call out Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, or anyone else if they are committing war crimes and human rights abuses. And I think it's wrong that Netanyahu and his government have labelled every criticism directed at them as anti-Semitic. Not everything is anti-Semitic if it is based on fact. If you are killing innocent men, women and children, and how many children have been killed, something needs to be done about it. Questions need to be asked, because I don't want to see that on TV every night. Most normal people don't either, regardless of where they're from. I don't care if it's Iraqi kids, white kids, black kids, pink kids, yellow kids, red kids, blue kids. Nobody wants to see people getting killed on TV every night. The world's intolerant enough. Yes, there is a very long, complex history between Palestine and Israel that goes back to before the time of the Bible that we in the Western world will never understand. And I don't think a lot of Palestinians or Jewish people not living in these areas understand fully themselves. It seems like multi-generational hate that is being taught, and I don't think many younger people from both these sides even know the reasons why Israelis and Palestinians are meant to hate each other. And I don't think it's anti-Semitic to call out Israel or any Jewish person that is inciting hatred towards another group. I don't want to see anti-Semitic attacks either. I don't think the Jews should be persecuted for being Jewish. So after the October 7th, 2023 attacks, large pro-Palestinian demonstrations occurred nationwide from 2024 to 2025. They're well documented, and they haven't just happened in Australia, they've happened all over the world. People are outraged at what's been happening. But at the same time, Hamas did attack Israel, and the reaction was pretty swift and heavy-handed. I just think now it's probably gone too far. Bibi can't use there was one Hamas fighter hiding in that hospital, so we blew up the whole neighborhood. That excuse doesn't work forever. No one believes it. On the flip side of that, a lot of reports claiming atrocities by Israel are also generated by Hamas and spread to news services who aren't bothered to fact-checking where these reports are coming from. A lot of these reports are coming from Hamas themselves or individuals with Hamas sympathies. One of the most infamous and well-documented protests occurred on the 3rd of August 2025 on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It drew tens of thousands of people to cross the bridge. The bridge had to be shut down, with organisers claiming hundreds of thousands nationwide, though police estimates were more cautious. In Melbourne, pro-Palestinian activists held weekly protests for over 70 weeks, which have been scaled back to monthly demonstrations. The protest movements spanned many months, in particular through 2024 and 2025. It hasn't happened every weekend, but there has been a hell of a lot of protests in basically a year time frame. The Albanese government has copped a lot of shit and criticism for letting these protests go ahead. So have local state leaders. There was a lot of backlash from the police saying they don't have the resources to control crowds that size and they're already overstretched. And I thought this was something the Albanese government got really woke about and just authorised, because a couple of months ago, Anthony Albanese did support a Palestinian state, which did cause a lot of controversy. He wasn't the only one. There was a couple of world leaders that also called for a Palestinian state. This is a fact I wanted to check also. Did the government have any hand in authorizing these protests? I think the biggest problem with the Free Palestine marches wasn't so much that the marches or the demonstrations happened. It was the slogans, the Hamas headbands and flags, as well as some pretty much outright terrorist propaganda that was being worn, flown and shown during these protests. If these people were just like marching in normal clothes and not carrying around billboards with very clear anti-Semitic and sometimes even borderline terrorist propaganda slogans on them, maybe I'd take it a bit more seriously. But that's the big problem I had with it, is not enough was done to crack down on that type of behaviour. And this is the same government that could literally crack down pretty much instantaneously on the cosplay neo-Nazi demonstrations that happened around the same time. You can't have a swastika on a flag because that's illegal. You can't do a Nazi salute because that's illegal. But you can have Hamas terrorist slogans, apparently, in this country. So, go figure. So these are some of the facts I wanted to check. So what I could find out, Australia has not banned pro-Palestinian protest slogans or Free Palestine messaging outright as terrorist propaganda. Under law, there are no clear public legal restrictions targeting general protest speech simply for supporting Palestinian rights. But the government is proposing new hate speech laws, and we already had some pretty tough hate speech laws to begin with. So what's the difference between hate speech and fucking protest speech? So if you say you hate the Jews outside of the context of a protest, that's considered hate speech. But if you say that during a protest, that's protest speech. Am I reading this correctly? Because that's how it comes off to me. And obviously those remarks were not hate speech. That was an example of the hypocrisy of some of these fucking laws. So what I'm gathering is you can pretty much say what you like if it's at a protest, but outside of a protest, it's considered hate speech. Now that seems pretty fucked to me, because that would give a lot of Albanese's critics a lot more ammo, because these people who obviously harboured anti-Semitic views can just hide their feelings in the protest. They could go to a protest and say, from the river to the fucking sea, and nothing can be done about it. And obviously what I just said was not hate speech. That was an example to illustrate what it is I'm talking about. However, interim government actions and advisories have sought to manage incitement to violence and anti-Semitic conduct, including university directives encouraging institutions to regulate protests and online materials that may cross into harassment or intimidation, particularly in the context of rising tension after the Bondi attack. This is not a blanket ban on protest speech, but guidance intended to balance free expression with safety and anti-hate obligations. And that's the problem I have with hate speech laws, and why I think they are so vague and so dangerous. If you limit people's freedom of speech, then you are, by definition, limiting their freedom of expression to safely express what they are feeling. We're in an era now where we have been told, you need to express your feelings, you need to talk about what is wrong, you need to talk about this and get whatever's off your chest. But the hate speech laws are very vague, and they tiptoe a very dangerous line between totalitarianism and Orwellianism. Now, I think rather than label everyone as racist and trying to crack down on hate speech, because that's not going to make the fucking problem go away. It's going to drive the problem underground. It's going to metastasize. It's going to grow. It's going to turn into an organization, which will turn into a movement, which will turn into a terrorist group that will fucking hit back because they're being oppressed. We've seen this play out all throughout fucking history, and yet no one wants to learn from history. The communists did the same fucking thing. If you criticized the party, you disappeared. You didn't toe the party line. You had your mind changed for you, usually with a fucking bullet. If you couldn't see the error of your ways, then you just got chucked in the fucking gulag for criticizing the supreme leader, Joseph Stalin, or the party as a whole. If you weren't on the communist train, you got chucked in the gulag. Even if you criticized for the most simple things, If you criticize the government, you criticize there wasn't enough food production. Why are we wasting all this food? We're starving. We need food. You're questioning the governmental narrative. You're questioning the supreme leader. 10 years in the fucking cooler. And this is the same society that promoted family members spying and reporting on each other. Let's not forget, over 100 million people, at least, died in the Soviet communist era. We can, as a species, can never go back to that. We have not learned a fucking thing. I have a very different view of hate speech laws. I think if you want hate speech laws to actually have an impact and not turn into a anti-hate speech movement, I think education is the answer. If you take someone who is a white supremacist or a neo-Nazi, an anti-Semite, whatever it happens to be, I think education is the best way forward. Maybe treat these people as human, as hard as that might be. I think sitting them down and talking to them one-on-one and finding out why they think and feel this certain way, get them to express themselves in a safe way where they won't be prosecuted or spend 20 years in jail, because that's going to make the fucking problem worse, because that means, dad goes to jail because he said he doesn't like some group. Well, his sons grow up to be leaders and advocates for dad's cause, don't they? They don't join the government. The problem gets worse. Jail one person for this type of thing, you create 3 more enemies. If someone is convicted of hate speech or inciting violence against an individual or a group, maybe they get detained in an educational facility for 28 days where they have to take an educational course that explains to them why they are wrong. However, they need to express why they believe this in the first place. So if you have a white supremacist who is claiming the white race is the master one, and he hates all black people, for example. This isn't hate speech, by the way, government. This is illustrating my point. Maybe talk to this individual, find out why he thinks and feels this way. And this is obviously case by case. If someone has committed a hate crime, if someone's killed someone because of their race or their belief, then they're going to fucking jail. They shouldn't be treated with any special treatment. You're a fucking criminal, fuck you. But if you're saying dumb shit online, or you're going to a protest with a flag of some persuasion, then maybe these people need to have some type of intervention before they get to the murdering extremist pathway that this can lead down. Maybe they need to be talked to. Why do you feel like this? Then maybe someone needs to explain to them, that's not true. This is why. That has worked in the past. There was a guy, Joe Rogan. He's an African-American guy, plays the piano. He's converted more Klan members by talking to them and proving them wrong than by simply having them locked up. I can't remember his name, but he's an absolutely inspiring character. He's got a bunch of Klan robes he keeps from all the people that have left the KKK because he connected with them through music. And that was the common ground that opened the door to conversation, which led to education and led to tolerance. Maybe that's what we need to be doing here when it comes to hate speech. Maybe we might have a much more peaceful and tolerant world where, because this has worked with neo-Nazis in America, they have seen the error of their ways. There's usually some point, some type of educational point or some conversation that starts the ball rolling for them to start questioning what it is they've been told, because nobody is born racist. Racism is a learnt behavior. People who are anti-Semitic are that way because they've been told that this is all the Jews' fault, yada, yada, yada. You break down those walls, you talk to them and find out why they fucking believe what they believe. One of the dumbest anti-Semitic kind of sub-branches would be the Holocaust deniers. There's so much evidence for it happening, and yet they don't believe it happened and they believe it's all a massive Jewish conspiracy. What's the end game in that? I mean, we've all seen the photos from concentration camps. Why do that to your own people unless there's a fucking good reason for it? And you can't tell me it's because you thought in 60 years' time Bibi was going to take power and make Israel the most powerful fucking state on planet Earth. Israel, in the grand scheme of things, is a fucking tiny country in the middle of a very geopolitically sensitive place on Earth. I think that's a good place to end the episode. I'll be picking this up in part 2 of the Bondi Massacre. I'll be going deeper into the hate speech laws. I'll be doing a deep dive into what they actually mean, what is being proposed, and some of the opposition behind it, and much more. All right, big thank you to everyone who listens to the end. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like. You can download and listen to your favorite episodes of the Truth Tank on your preferred podcast player. You can find the Truth Tank at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. I'm also on Rumble now, so if you'd like to support the Rumble channel, head on over to Rumble and give it a follow and a like. You can also find the Truth Tank on Pandora, Castbox, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread it around and get the word out there. If you're enjoying the show, why don't you leave a 5-star rating and review? Each review helps the show grow and get found. And if you'd really like to support the Truth Tank, you can head on over to the Etsy Truth Tank store and buy yourself some merch. You can get yourself a Truth Tank tank top, the Truth Cap, a Truth Tank logo tee, and coming very soon, a Truth Tank hoodie. I'll be releasing more things over the course of the year, so definitely go check out the Etsy store. Once again, thank you to everyone who listened to the end. Your support means a lot, and I'll be back in the next couple of weeks with a brand new episode. But until then, I'm the Tank. This is the truth. Truth to tell.